We'll start the show with our North America correspondent Jon Brain's look at some of the key issues that are likely to be covered during this visit.
Their relationship certainly has the occasional hitch, but for the most part, the U.S. President Donald Trump and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdoğan appear to enjoy a genuine rapport. Trump regularly refers to Turkey's leader in glowing terms.
My honor to be with a friend of mine, somebody I've become very close to in many respects, and he's doing a very good job.
But beyond the two presidents themselves, all is not well between their respective countries. Syria is the biggest and most obvious fault line in the relationship, but there are other major tensions. Among them is Turkey's purchase of the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. Ankara says it only bought the S-400 because Washington had refused to sell it the American Patriot system. A system it insists it's still willing to acquire if the terms are right. But the Pentagon believes the S-400 could compromise NATO's new F-35 fighter jet by identifying the weak spots in its stealth capabilities. Turkey, a partner in the development of the F-35, has had its participation in the program suspended.
Turkey will certainly and regrettably lose jobs and future economic opportunities from this decision. It will no longer receive more than $9 billion in projected work share related to the F-35 over the life of the program.
Relations have also been soured by a court action in New York against Halkbank, one of Turkey's largest banks. It's been accused of operating a scheme to undermine U.S. sanctions on Iran. Halkbank denies the charges, which it claims are politically motivated. But if convicted, it could face fines running into billions of dollars.
The yeas are 403, the nays are 16.
And then there's the issue of sanctions. The House of Representatives recently voted overwhelmingly in favor of a resolution to bar most weapons sales to Turkey and to freeze the U.S. assets of senior Turkish officials. The Senate is expected to follow suit. Analysts say the U.S.-Turkey tensions have brought about a rare consensus in modern-day American politics.
It's really hard in the United States, in this political environment, to get both sides of the political aisle, Democrats and Republicans, unified on anything, even agreeing that it's the sun that's out right now. But they agree that Erdoğan has gone too far and that this is a problem. Trump will face pushback for anything he wants to do to reset the relationship with Erdoğan.
And Trump will already be under considerable pressure on Wednesday. The inquiry into whether he should be impeached is due to move into the public arena, with the proceedings broadcast live on television across the nation. He might find the visit of a fellow leader, a man he describes as a friend, a welcome distraction. Jon Brain, TRT World, Washington.
Of a soundbite from that address from the press conference.
Border is holding very well. The ceasefire is holding very well. We've been speaking to the Kurds, and they seem to be very satisfied. As you know, we've pulled back our troops quite a while ago because I think it's time for us not to be worried about other people's borders. I want to worry about our borders. We got plenty of borders to worry about. I want to thank the President for the job they've done. Again, and Turkey recently has captured over 100 ISIS fighters, and they are taking care of them.
All right, let's bring in our panel of guests. Joining me now is Matthew Brodsky, who is a Middle East expert and geopolitical analyst, and I'd like to welcome back Ali Demirdas, who is a professor of international relations from South Carolina University. All right, gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you on. Time is ticking. In about half an hour, we should be hearing from them. Matt, let me start with you. You understand the dynamics of what's going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. There is President Trump, on the one hand, sort of pushing his own foreign policy agenda, but it's not as smooth as he'd like it to be because there is some backlash from Congress. Talk to us about the dynamics, what President Trump is up against.
Well, first, there has been an issue with Congress as far as Trump is concerned, and that, of course, from his perspective, is across the board on many, many issues. So
first and foremost, the impeachment hearings, which have gone public,
is drowning out this, which this would normally be incredibly big news across all of America's TV cameras. But yes, that is the case. And so that plays out for the American public. He has a Congress issue, but there's also an issue which is different than previous times with now the Defense Department, who used to be far more of a staunch supporter of Turkey at all costs. There have been, the issue of the S-400 has really put a wedge between the relationship, and there are many other issues right now. So President Trump would clearly remind anyone that it is his prerogative the direction he wants to do with foreign policy. That's, of course, a lot of what he's saying right now in his own hearing, that the defense is that whatever he wants to do, whoever he wants to appoint, can do whatever he wants. That's how it works in the U.S.
All right, Ali Demirdas, this is the second meeting between President Trump and President Erdoğan in 6 months. Last time they met, it was at the G20 summit in Osaka in Japan. But the last time the Turkish president was here in Washington was back in 2017, I believe, in May. What's the difference? Because the message from the Turkish side is pretty much the same in terms of we need to do what we need to do in terms of protecting our national security, our borders. What has changed?
Turkey and the United States and Turkey signed an agreement to impose the safe zone, and this agreement basically drew the line towards the meeting between Trump and Mr. Erdoğan, and that's the difference. That's the most important aspect of this meeting.
Okay, the signing or this coming to an agreement between the Americans and the Turkish side has obviously been hailed by President Trump as a success. We've heard what he had to say, but obviously from Congress, this has been said, all right, this is the abandonment of the quote-unquote Kurds, which is technically incorrect or incomplete.
Right. Well, he's not only doing the battle with Congress or just Democrats, but even yesterday, Congressman McCall, the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, put out a pretty stinging rebuke about the meeting with his own list that we're all familiar with at this point of what the problems are in the relationship. So I think that this is something that the president is going to battle uphill about for many reasons. I mean, one, he misunderstood, I think, what the response would be from a really quick decision to pull out of northeastern Syria. He wasn't expecting that backlash, and I don't think that he is either particularly paying attention to those around him who said, okay, but this meeting will also be even more controversial. Because in the end, the bottom line is the way American politics work is if President Trump doesn't win re-election, he'll be out next year. Even if he's in for 4 more years, the institutional issues that remain will still remain past President Trump being in office. And he's, again, the author of trying to undo every unilateral thing that the previous president did, of course. So that's something that he has to be aware of.
That's the MO of the current presidency. All right. Ali, Matt talked about the decision to withdraw. We've seen this number of times. It's been a back and forth. I think, to the best of my knowledge, it's been 3 times.
Yes,
since
this is the 3rd time.
A decision from the U.S. came out. How does Turkey sort of deal with this, or is it President Erdoğan says, "Look, I only deal with President Trump. I really don't care what else is going on, whether it's in Congress or the DOD. I only deal with President Trump."
The fact that there has been 3, in quotes, withdrawal, American troop withdrawal in Syria, shows us that there is a dysfunctionality between, in the government, in Washington. Trump wants to withdraw troops. Trump actually wants to focus his attention to China. He thinks that there is not much utility left in the Middle East, so he doesn't want to stay in the Middle East. He wants to focus his attention on China. But what is happening is, I believe there is a backlash from the Pentagon, especially the CENTCOM. They are trying to stay in Syria. They are trying to remain relevant in the Middle East. Therefore, there's a back and forth policy decision making going on between Trump and the Pentagon.
And how big is the struggle between sort of the executive branch and some of the institutions that Ali just talked about?
Yeah, he brings up a great point. I would even extend it a bit further. What you have is, when you look at what the U.S. policy and goals were inside of Syria, you have a different set of talking points and a different policy objective from the Defense Department versus the State Department. For instance, the Defense Department never brings up the issue of Iran at all, which is very important for America's presence in northeast Syria, and specifically, of course, in the southern part in Al-Tanf. So this is something the State Department has included as one of the three goals to ensure the defeat of ISIS, and another one is, of course, to go with, to push back against Iran. There is no authorization for the use of military force through Congress for the Defense Department to rely on when it comes to dealing with Iran. So it would naturally not be in its talking points, but therefore they're working at cross purposes. But the main thing here that needs to be, that I think Turkey should be aware of, is that the institutional shifting of the Defense Department, the Pentagon, is a big deal. That doesn't get solved. I mean, look at President Trump himself, who understands the swamp, the fact that there are people who he feels are working against him in all parts of the government who he considers leftover from the previous administration, but are institutionalized positions. Once you change an institution's position in the United States, we're talking a glacial pace for this to shift back.
It's a paradigm shift. All right. Ali, interesting point made by Matt was that in terms of talking about the different perspectives, he said the Department of Defense was approached to sort of repress Iranian expansion. I know that you wrote a paper and then you underlined this sort of fact, or not fact, but this theory that hasn't been really sort of surfaced in media all that much, and that is the U.S.'s support for the YPG to actually control or to prevent the expansion of Iranian influence in Syria. That's actually quite interesting.
Yes. The idea that the YPG would roll back the Iranian influence in the Middle East is wrong on many levels. First of all, the YPG/PKK, actually it is the Syrian branch of the PKK, will never go against Iran and Syria in this matter. PKK has cooperated with Iran for its survival in the past, so there is no reason to expect PKK to fight against or to counter Iran in the Middle East. Also, the YPG doesn't have material wherewithal to counter Iran. No matter how many weapons you deliver to YPG, no matter how much training you deliver to YPG, you shouldn't expect the YPG to counter Iran as seen in the ground.
Okay. Ali, thank you very much. Matt, we're going to come to you, but we're also waiting to hear from the two presidents in a short bit. Approximately about 30 minutes. We know that the two leaders are sort of wrapping up their working lunch, and we're going to be, those are live pictures from inside of the White House. You can see that the final preparations are being made at the podiums. The sound checks are being made, and we expect Donald Trump and President Erdoğan to sort of come out of their working lunch and address members of the press to talk about some of the key topics, key issues that they discussed in the past 3 hours. All right, so let's cross over to our North America correspondent, Jon Brain, who is outside of the White House. He joins us now. John, it's been a busy day for the Turkish delegation, but we also know that we've seen something quite extraordinary in the sense of a group of Republican senators being invited to the White House. What was that all about?
Well, it is quite unusual, Alican, when a leader visits the White House for this to happen. And the only explanation can be, of course, that Trump feels so isolated over his policy towards Turkey. It's a policy which is opposed by the Pentagon, by the State Department, and in particular by Congress, which has voted overwhelmingly to oppose sanctions on Turkey. Now, what we're told is that this is all about trying to have a clear the air meeting to bring some of these congressmen and women on board to understand what Trump's situation is, what Turkey's position is. And Trump really needs them on board because it's a big day for him. A couple of miles away from here on Capitol Hill is the first of the public hearings into his impeachment inquiry. He ultimately will be judged by the senators in the Senate who will vote after he's been impeached, which we all assume he will be. They'll vote on whether to throw him out of office or not. So he needs to get some political support domestically, and a good start for him on a day like today would be able to say, look, I've done a deal, here you are, you can take part in that. ultimately for Trump at the moment, the priority would be on the S-400. If he can persuade Turkey not to deploy the S-400, that would be quite an achievement for the White House today.
All right. Jon Brain live for us from outside of the White House. All right, let's bring in a new guest, Kasim, who's a defense analyst and covers the Pentagon for the Anadolu agency. Kasim, good to have you on. Now, John was actually talking about sort of this built-up tension, whether it was because of President Trump's Syria policy, but also because of Turkey's decision to purchase the S-400 missile defense system. This is something that you have covered, yes. You know very well. Bring us up to speed as to why we're living what we're living.
Okay, so first of all, we should put things into context before we came up to the very contentious story. Turkey did not come up overnight and ask to buy a request to buy a S-400 from Russia. Turkey's kind of search for an missile defense system, air defense system, goes back to 2000s. And Turkey initially opened a competition which was preferring, of course, either a PAC-2 by Raytheon, that's a Patriot 2 systems, or Eurosams Italian and French joint consortium. Then, of course, the Chinese offer came for. And then Turkey started to negotiate the Chinese system, and then it was, of course, knocked down because Turkey, the NATO allies, and United States pushed back against Turkey. When we come to 2015, when the Turkish aircraft downed a Russian jet in Syria, Turkey was there without any air defense system against Russian aggression or Russian fighters, Russian other air systems.
So that was the point where
yes, Turkey decided seriously to negotiate with the United States about Patriot 3. And for 17 months, of course, the negotiations did not really conclude to a point. And then Turks decided to buy the Russian S-400s because based on the deal they get from the Russians, it was better than what the United States had.
Well, so in terms of perhaps maybe technology, but also a collaboration
price.
To develop
yes.
Technology
both
together.
Price and technology and so on.
Okay.
So the thing, when the Russian jets went down and Turkey was kind of vulnerable there, the United States pulled back its Patriots from the Turkish borders. And then just after that, the United States also pulled back the fighters from Incirlik, F-15 fighters. And then Turkey was at the time in the hands of Russians. So when we asked the question at the Pentagon, what is going to happen to the Turks? It's a NATO ally, and then the borders is a NATO flank, southern flank. What will happen to the Turkish border if the Russians are going to violate it or somehow down the Turkish?
Article 5 of the Charter.
Yes,
okay.
And then they said that, well, those systems are out because of regular maintenance, and they never returned back. So the negotiations went on, and Turkey ended up to buy S-400s, of course.
So that is the story from the Turkish perspective. President Trump has said, sung a similar tune at the G20 summit in Osaka, saying that, you talked briefly about this, but the story on Capitol Hill in Congress is very different. They are very displeased with Turkey purchasing a Russian-made system.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, I'm not one to defend the previous policy of the Obama administration. It was frankly horrible, and specifically in Syria, but it was designed, our policy was to boost Iran, and this was in the framework of us having negotiations over their nuclear program. So these decisions also were purposeful when it came to us helping Russia to come in even more into Syria when it came to chemical weapons as far as 2013. So in our previous administration under Obama, we did a lot of things. Now, President Trump, of course, inherited that. Like all presidents, they like to come into office and pick and choose which parts of history they can deal with. For Obama, Iraq was never his war. For President Trump, Syria was never his war.
Well,
but they're all connected.
The advantage of cherry picking when you're the most powerful man on the face of the earth.
Right.
All right.
There are dominoes.
Exactly. Kasim, let me turn to you. In terms of the Turkey's decision to purchase this, we've heard from the U.S. National Security Advisor O'Brien saying that, if Turkey goes ahead with this, there will be sanctions.
Yes.
And we are hearing about a second letter being sent from the the United States to the Turkish administration. Can Turkey avoid any sanctions?
Well, right now there is a CATSA sanction regarding these S-400 systems that particularly targets this one, and then it is still on the table of President Trump. He has not knocked down it, and then it's not really. It's because it's low. It's not really and kind of under the power of Trump to knock it down, but he can kind of delay it to a certain extent.
But he can also
so
sort of pick and choose which out of those 11
yes, there are 12
needs to be implemented.
Yeah, there are actually 12. Yeah, 12 kind of sanctions. 5 of them are actually 5 or 6 of them are kind of mild ones, moderate ones, and the other 6 are incredibly kind of catastrophic. So President Trump can select some of them, which can be mild, moderate in tone and tension. But of course, it's currently under the current kind of circumstances we see. I don't think there is a way for the Turkey to avoid those sanctions because there is 2 ways. Either the United States is going to get away or relinquish from what they said, or Turkey is going to get away, get rid of the S-400s.
Okay, but in that letter, it was supposedly, allegedly said that one way that Turkey can avoid sanctions is if it doesn't sort of activate the S-400 missile defense system, and then we could talk about maybe Turkey's coming off the suspension list of the F-35 and then a possible sort of selling of the Patriot.
Yes.
Is that possible?
Of course, from
what I'm asking is,
Pentagon.
Can Turkey choose not to activate a system that it spent billions and billions of dollars on?
Well, it's going to be a big decision for Turkey to decide not to activate those systems because it came out of the actual conjectural needs from Turkey.
Okay. I believe. Okay. I'm going to ask you to hold on just a second, Kasim, because these are the latest pictures that we have coming to us here at TRT World. As you can see, they're from the Oval Office. Let's